Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work.
Hey, welcome to KIMEcast. All right, today we're going to be talking about healing and looking at tissue healing and talking about this concept of obviously the body's ability to adapt and adaptation. And I feel like that's the field that we're in, and that's what we do. The better we're able to do that, then the better the outcome at the end of the day. We got the opportunity to go to Italy just a couple of months ago and do a talk there, and the presentation was creating a bulletproof body and stress to create adaptation. So we want to kind of dive into this. Now, there's some basics in tissue healing that I think we need to know about, and I think are pretty standard, and that's not really the goal of today, but I think if you don't have that, it's really hard to really take in some of the things we want to talk about and kind of discuss fully. So some basic tissue healing stuff that's, I think, critical to understand would be, the types of tissues and the time frames around them. So getting started really basic is obviously bone, and we know heals very, very well. It's a very, very healthy tissue in the body. It's the maybe most living tissue we have. A lot of people that are not in the healthcare field might be surprised to hear how active and how live bone is, but bone is really the fundamental tissue of our body, I would say. It's the bone marrow holds and all the stem cells and those things. So, but it's actually very much alive. It's why people say if you break a bone, it's better than tearing a ligament at times, because it does heal extremely well, typically. So usually it's like a 6 to 8 week period of time, although that time frame can be much, much faster, and it can be slightly longer, but that's usually the ballpark we're in. I remember hanging out with Dr. Green, a friend of mine, and we were in the clinic together, and we had a patient that had broke his arm about 8 days prior, and it took him a while to get into the clinic for some reason. I can't remember what it was, but had to do with the typical fantastic healthcare system that we have. But nonetheless, I fell off the monkey bars, broke his forearm. Not a huge deal, but nonetheless came in about 8 days out, and his arm was pretty crooked at the time. X-rayed it, and the X-ray looked like a pure clean break of both the radius and the ulna. And you could see the black directly in between both bones, clear as day, plenty of space. So I asked him a stupid question looking back, like, hey, are you going to be able to reset that just right now? Because I hadn't seen that done before. I'm like, this is going to be amazing. Like, this would be great. He's like, there's no way. He goes, I have to take him to the OR for this one. He goes, that thing's solid. He goes, even though it looks black in the X-ray, he goes, the bone growth in that space is already solid. I'm going to have to re-break it for that to go. I'm like, yeah, but on the X-ray, it's not there. He's like, yeah, but it is.
It's pretty fast.
So it's pretty incredible, like when you consider what bone's able to do. And that was an example that even though you can't see the collagen formation to kind of bridge this gap and fill in, that it certainly is happening at a really, really rapid rate, especially on a young person. But we see that throughout the lifespan. So bone heals really, really fast. So I think that's a big one and good to know as we talk about weight-bearing status is how we progress our patients, and loading bone is important to get it to respond even faster. Probably the second area would be talking about tendons. You have tendons, ligaments, cartilage. So tendons a little bit faster than ligaments and cartilage, but not by a lot. And of course, it depends on what part of the tendon we're talking about. As the tendon comes to attach to the bone, it's going to have a little slower time, where it's more in the muscle belly, a little bit longer. But nonetheless, probably something around 12 weeks is kind of what you're looking at. We've seen varying numbers around 10 to 12 weeks around tendon healing stuff. Muscle strains we know are pretty rapid. So like just a tear in the mid-belly of a muscle, or like a partial tear or strain, might be 6 or 8 weeks. And that's because it has a great blood supply. You have great blood in the middle of the tissue, so it tends to heal up much faster. So we don't tend to see too many like strains of hamstrings or strains of the calf even, or some of these different things in the clinic, because they never go along far enough to get to the doc to actually need to come in. So it's not something you're going to see a lot of.
In the muscle belly.
Yeah, in the muscle belly, unless you're actually on the sideline with sports medicine and you're actually intervening quickly or working with the team closely. A lot of times these folks just get better on their own because they have such good healing abilities, and they're usually an active, healthy person that strained their muscle in the first place. Mm-hmm. I myself am not fast enough to strain my own tissues, so I have nothing to worry about. But those that are faster, more explosive might have that issue, and then but they usually heal up pretty well. But I don't think that they should go without therapy. I think there's things we could do there and need to do there to really get the tissue back to tolerate full loads of force. I think they're often not rehabbed well and incomplete, but that's another story.
You referenced weeks. I'd say to simplify, you have a month for muscle, 2 months for bone, 3 months for the other soft tissues. Right. I think it's just a nice formula. 1,
True.
2, 3.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Yep. Ligaments, cartilage, stuff like that. It's 3 months plus, and it just takes a long time. The tissue, the blood supply to them is very poor, so it's slow.
I dove a little bit into the science realm several months back. I was curious of the variance of growth hormone across people. And so here's the variance. The variance is, I'll just multiply it of an X factor. Okay, so when you're a kid, if you look at a kid that, say, 13-year-old athlete, and you compare a big size, really athletic kid versus a little bit smaller, a little daintier, a little more frail kid, what's the variance in growth factor? Because that would be also the variance in how quickly they do that regeneration. So across kids, it's 7X. So if you have your super athletes that just can heal from anything, they strain, they have a football game on the weekends, and then by next Tuesday, they're back at it. They don't hurt, they feel good. Yeah, that's it. They are a 7X of the most frail, the most vulnerable of that population. If you dive into men and women, men, it's 25X. Women, 15X. So when we talk about these like formulas, I love a good formula because I'm an ex-math person. I was an ex-engineer. So still am, I think I'm an engineer. But I like thinking about formulas. I love the 1, 2, 3 formula, but then I remember that variance and think of that as like, is that a person that is a 2-month bone healing and you could probably push it closer to 6 weeks because they are a 25X or a 7X. They are the higher end of that healing person. Or are you dealing with the opposite? And I think that's the critical part is we do so much in therapy of really sizing someone up. We're sizing up what is their regeneration potential and where on the spectrum they lie.
So you mean when men have 25X, 25 more than somebody else? Or
Then the lowest. 25,
so there's a range.
Then the lowest, yep.
Right.
Yeah. And let's say most people are just in the middle. And if you're a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, no big deal. But if you have someone that has been elite because they find elite regeneration in their body, and then you bring them right next to a more frail on the other end, it's a huge difference.
Now, how would you identify if someone is more to the left or right of this norm?
The strength of their hair, possibly. I think I'd probably like just Superman test, take their tensile and just tug it. Look at their nails.
So classic, Russ.
Their nails. I mean, I wish I could say the whites of their eyes, but I think it's like also like you handle them and you like when you hold someone, does it feel dense?
There's something to that. There's something about like you're right. I mean, yeah, quality hair and nails, which people say, oh, I need to take more biotin, but it is how healthy is the body, how well is it regenerating? Obviously. I think you're right about that. As far as like the skin, is the body healthy? You can almost just tell, and you see it in people. Like you can see it, and you can feel it in the tissue. You can feel the density. You can feel the weight. You can feel the kind of the strength if it's in shape or if it's more flaccid and not in shape. So interesting. It'd be difficult to objectify, but but nonetheless valuable, and it's something to consider. I think how hard you push someone. What's their current condition? Just had a lady today. Actually, she's she was close to 80. I just saw her, and she was mad. It's classic. She was mad. Left her previous physical therapist and was sent over to us. Because she was mad. The last physical therapist said, hey, she thought she was old and frail, so he didn't load her. So, she walked in totally unassisted, no need for anything. She's got a right knee that needs to be replaced and a left knee that's got some meniscus damage that isn't worth repairing because, according to the doctor, because she's got some osteoarthritis as well. And she was fine, full range of motion on both sides, like 0 to 145, sits on her own heels. She walked in, no assistance, and the exercise they gave her was in-place marching. So, not quite enough load to stimulate change. So, once we shoot ourselves in the foot as our own profession, it'd be like, what are we doing here? But so we right away went into some loading patterns to stimulate this because as a person who is older but not frail, fairly strong, has been strength. She said I did a strength class and a strength and aerobics class her entire life, 3 days a week. She's very fit. 115 pounds, like 5'5", 80 years old, ready to go. So anyway.
I think those examples, we try and find examples to prove a point. That's why we tell stories. We tell stories to our therapists, in our workshops, and in pods. And I think a story is great when it really kind of exemplifies a point. I got one similar. I got a 98-year-old in a wheelchair for 1 year. And she had been in and out transfers, doing a lot of transfers out of the wheelchair. But she came and she and her daughter came, and her daughter had a lot of faith in me and said, "Hey, can you help my mom be able to stand? Because she really wants to be able to dance for her great-granddaughter's wedding. Great-granddaughter's wedding is in 6 months, and she's very motivated to exercise so that she could stand and dance." And by golly, she showed up twice a week for 4 months. And that woman was able to stand and dance a 3-minute dance with someone else holding her. And then she went right back to the wheelchair during a summertime wedding. She passed in December, 6 months later. That story is amazing to me because it told me the body can thrive until it's ready to die. And so when people are curious, like, oh, can I handle this exercise? I actually say, like, if you're ready to die, then it's probably a little too much load. If you're ready to live, absolutely not. We were born to move. Your body will continue to change. All of the 1, 2, 3 that you just said, all those formulas, they change and adapt if we will it and we want to live. It's really that simple. I mean, this woman, like, it's an incredible story that showcases a point. What are we doing here?
No doubt. Yeah. That's the words to live by, for sure. But the body made to move is what it comes down to at the end of the day, for sure. And let it be said, we talked about some older folks there for a moment. If we've got some young guys, I know we got a beast right now, sophomore football player who's a stud, and we're loading him to failure on just about everything he does in an effort because his body is, again, in this top 25 percentile of performance and natural HGH and testosterone because he's like 15 years old and 16 years old and just one of the top recruits in the country. So he's everything we do with him is like, let's get him to a point of a lot of tissue stress so that tissue can adapt. That comes into programming and such as well, that it's not about failure every single time, but you have to fail and then give adaptation windows and time for people to adapt. So it's something to take into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, you look at protocols, whether or not you're on an internet protocol or you're getting some online digital help or you asked AI to give you a program. This really goes back to, like, what are we doing? What's the value of what we're doing? And I think as a PT and we're watching the load on people, we're kind of like looking, how does their body accept that load? Are they shake? What are the intangibles that you could never share without the visual look of the person doing the activity? And you could see breath rate. You could see the stress on your system. You could see if they're shaking. You could see if they're are they holding their breath in the right ways at the right times to create that power or that stability force? Do they move gracefully and smoothly because they have a skilled movement pattern, whether it's a squat or a get up or an Olympic lift of some sort? We're watching this. We're really kind of watching to see how does that body tolerate stress. The only way to get good at it is to coach it and to do it. And you have to do it over and over and over again to kind of watch and see, what we're doing here.
Yeah, we spoke last time quite a bit about value and what it means to be valuable. And I think this is it. Like you just said, exercise is no longer like, what's the exercise or some sort of like pencil drawing picture or even an AI, exercise sheet, or exercises are no longer the question because you can search any exercise or any movement or any question, how do I rehab my rotator cuff on Google, and it will give you all the exercises. That's no longer the challenge of our profession. The challenge of our profession now is, can we coach them? And can we observe the person doing the exercise and determine, is the load enough to institute change? Is the body going to adapt? Or is it not loaded enough? What's the limiting factor? To your point there, is it cardiovascular? Is it control and balance and coordination? Is it strength and fatigue? What are the limiting factors? And then be able to attack those strategically. And I think that's the art of this profession now as a coach or as a therapist is, can you intervene and help load them and give them the right direction in that process? Because if you're just choosing exercises off a list or providing a list, you're done.
Yeah, you're missing it. If you're just doing it off, or if the doctor's working off an image, and if the PT is working off a diagnosis, and if we're just looking at some data points, we're missing what happens when the person or the athlete or the mover just does things live. That's how you learn. It's the best learning, and so much so that whenever I see something, I just ask for the person's phone, say, I'm going to capture in video what I'm seeing, and then we look at it together. And I'll try and make sense of what I'm seeing to kind of just find value. What are the things that we need to change? This is how you're moving on the left side of your body. This is how you're learning, moving on the right side of your body. And we find, what is the tissue that needs to be loaded? Is it the nervous system? Is it stability? Are you missing movement here? Do we need a lot more practice? We need a few more 1,000 reps in this deep pattern. We have to clarify where we're going.
Totally. Okay, as we come back to this concept of healing, this idea of what makes people better healers than others. Obviously, there's some genetic code. We talked a little about maybe their HGH or testosterone levels are going to be massively impacting on how fast and how well they heal. what else is a factor? Obviously, nutrition, sleep, as we mentioned.
Yeah. I think we get in the basics of what they're eating and what time are they going to bed. I mean, we don't need to dive into technology. I effing hate it, in terms of like the social media craze, the blue light, the constant stimuli, the constant dopamine hit, the inability to relax. I think what I tell people is like your deep sleep is your best deep sleep is in the first cycle. That's your best hit. You just stressed your body, and what you're really interested in is growing. You want to grow from the stress you just did to your body, and to compensate, you need that deep sleep hit. And your best one's the first one. It's the longest one. I think that's the cool part about all of the Aura Ring, the Whoop band. I used to have the phone listen to me at night, do the whole sleep cycle app of like, when am I snoring? When am I not? When am I not moving? When's my REM cycle? And across all those wearables and technologies, I think what everyone can appreciate is they have a few cycles, through the night. And your first and most powerful, your first one is your most powerful. And you need to take care of when are you supposed to go to bed? When does your circadian rhythm say, sleep, because I need to heal? I think that's top dog. You could probably eat like shit as long as you get enough of the macros. I wish it was as, you can have to have the grass-fed beef to really grow. No, you don't. You actually just need some really basic macros to grow. It doesn't need to be the best quality. Your organs might suffer, but
yeah, depending on genetic quality, right? There's some really, really strong people out there that don't have the access to all of these specialty foods or organic foods and are eating really, really poorly, but performing at elite levels.
Yeah.
Probably do more due to genetic code than anything. But in sleep, when you see that sleep cycle, we're seeing that the hormones are released in the middle of the night, right? So sometimes early hours of the morning. So like 2, 3, 4 in the morning are typically the times where you see the highest levels of testosterone released in the body, HGH, and that's the concept there is that's when the healing is happening. So if you're working hard and you're causing stress, doing enough stress to cause adaptation, for the adaptation to actually happen, you have to sleep to go with it, and then you have to have some protein and nutrients on board to support that process. All right, so there's other things about healing that are good too. So then we talk a lot in our courses and stuff about simulating mitochondrial activity and simulating load to get more mitochondrial activity and excite them, if you will, not necessarily to make more of them or duplicate them, but to at least make them more active and more excitable.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of evidence around this as far as when you load tissue, how long you have to load it for to get this type of response.
Yep. Before, I think, you and I have been in this for a long time. And I think you and I talked about this point about 10 years ago. And it was very clear, without much research in this realm 10 years ago, it was clear that 30 seconds was very doable for a lot of people. 60 seconds was really hard. And people did not like 90 seconds. That was really, really hard. So you kind of get anecdotally, you get a feel of what's really hard and what's not.
Yeah, just try a plank on your own. If you're not sure with those time frames, and you'll learn really quickly. Those are about your time frames. 30 is pretty easy. Starts to get kind of gnarly around a minute. And if you're really a beast, you can get to a minute and a half or more. But
yeah. And then now we look at the research, and you kind of see really clearly, between 60 and 90 seconds, repeat bouts of that. Does a lot of magic things for collagen expression and protein expression. It's not that hard. I think from a protein standpoint, the joint angle matters. How much of the muscle is loaded, what's the lever of the muscle. I think you get a lot more into the biomechanics of the muscle and the arrangement of the muscle. Is it uniarticulate? Is it biarticulate? Is there a pattern? Are there 800 muscles involved like a deadlift? Is there 4 muscles involved like a leg extension? I think muscles we can go down the rabbit hole of biomechanics and the nervous system, but tendons are kind of simple. I think they're much simpler structure, and they just need really a simple load to really express themselves effectively
with a consistent recipe for it. Yeah, I think what Russ is talking about here is we started out like looking at what we do with people, where we find ourselves operating. And from my career over the last 20 years and working in the sports medicine space, I consistently find myself coming back to a few common things that it's my responsibility to give to an athlete. So an athlete they need range of motion, they need control, balance, neuromuscular recruitment, et cetera. And then they need power, strength, and explosiveness. So obviously a strength coach, performance coach is handling the upper end of that quadrant, strength building, hypertrophy, power, explosiveness. They can and should handle that quite well. So it's usually not an area that I'm doing a lot in. I'm well versed in that, and I have done it before and certainly can do it and do it with several athletes. But if they're part of a team where that person is provided, then they do an outstanding job of that, then that's great. And then you also have the basics. They know that they have to do some basic flexibility and be able to move through their joint angles pretty well. And frankly, most youth and most collegiate or even pro guys, most of them for the most part, have decent range of motion that you're not sitting there having to do a lot of joint mobilizations and really get things moving. And sometimes if there's some trauma or some injury, then there'll be something there from the past. But for the most part, that's pretty easy to address and manage very, very quickly, or something they even address on their own. But that middle space of like, hey, I've got the range of motion, and then I've got to build the strength on it. What a lot of these athletes and people lack is this idea of control. Do they have control of the joint through maximum range of motion? And over again, whether it be youth or even professional athletes, anywhere in between, is this idea that we have to help the athlete, help the body learn how to control that segment, establish more time under tension, establish more finite control so that they could take that and then apply this huge amount of hypertrophy and force to gain leverage and gain power. So that's where we started talking about what are the missing links and where do we find ourselves in the rehab space constantly intervening. And this was kind of the missing element here was prolonged holds, being able to, can people hold positions for a longer period of time? So if you think about the areas that break down like a rotator cuff, people might talk about the core or like the low back. And then of course you have the knee. These are the kind of top 3 orthopedic injuries in the world. They're very, very predominant throughout the culture, throughout the world. And all of those joints need a tremendous amount of localized stability and control, or they end up failing. So it's always about building those control systems back in, building a rotator cuff system, scapular system that kind of supports that function, building all your multifidi, rotatories, core musculature to support the spine, and then the same thing for the knee. So we started developing these strategies of like long holds, and that's really allowed us to kind of start to dive into the research of like what else is happening as we're doing these long hold type strategies, right? Looking at 1 minute holds on things, or how long do they have to hold it for? And we found this very unique correlation that's great, not unique at all. Actually, it happens across the body, which is great. But by loading the tissue for close to 60 seconds, that's when we start to see the mitochondria activity and the gene expression really start to rise in the literature, which is great because that's also where we see the fatigue pattern really like not almost completely break down. It's starting to break down around 40 seconds or so usually. And as we get closer to 60 seconds, I mean, most people can't continue at that rate, which then it gives you this idea of that's when fatigue happens. And if we look at, well, when does injury occur? You know, the number 2 risk of injury is fatigue. So if the tissue's in a fatigue state at 1 minute hold and they're not getting proper gene expression, not getting proper mitochondrial function, you know, that's a risk factor.
And so, and you're taxing the slow twitch muscle tissue, which should be better at the, the mitochondrial density, equation. And they should be able to contract for a while and repeatedly after an injury or after trauma or after pain. This is robbed from us, and it's not good. It's not something that talks to us. It's not something that says like, oh, I know my slow twitch fibers are poor stamina right now. No one knows that. You don't know it until you're tested. Now, for all the people out there that are following with us and say, well, what about all those people that can handle a plank for 12 minutes? These people that just kind of like hold on to these positions for a really long time. Well, if you stop contracting certain muscles, then it's really easy to hold on to a position. I could hold on to a stand for 24 hours. I could just stand really tall. And if I relax my body in a certain way, I might not be able to use much muscle at all. So it's not so much of can you do a plank, it's can you engage all the muscular tissue required for a good solid plank and then hold on to that contraction. So the idea is not that we go from 30 seconds to a minute to 5 minutes to 20 minutes, but can we handle repeat bouts of a 60 to 90 second hit? Because that does 2 things that we know very well. It rocks up mitochondrial density and fissuring of that existing mitochondria to get really, really great mitochondrial quality. So you get a boost in quantity, you get an improvement in quality, but then you also express the tendons and you get the tendon expression associated with all that tissue. And it's also it's insanely safe to handle a lot of these positions. They're really not threatening for the body. It's just really hard work.
Absolutely. All right. Good. So if you guys know too, on mitochondria, that is the tool in the body that stimulates or converts oxygen into energy. So by having that more active and more dense, then we see a better use of oxygen by the muscle tissue or by the chemistry of the body to then create more ATP. So we have more energy for the muscle to utilize. So fatigue becomes less of a problem. So that seems to be the activated ingredient there.
Yeah, you also get more energy to heal. Healing takes energy. Movement takes energy. So more ATP and the better quality actually regenerates faster. I think that goes back to the growth factor variance. I wonder if that also bleeds into really just the gene expression of mitochondrial health. If we kind of mean health means more of them and they're better at doing their job. Because that's another big part of what the body is doing is it's trimming the fat of the bad organelles or the organelles that have some breakdown and improving the organelles quality and quantity. That's it.
Yep. So we look at it so far. We know that testosterone helps healing. That's evident, legal or non. Not suggesting that illegal is the way to go, but we know that it certainly has an impact. HGH presence, mitochondrial activity, and then from a strength standpoint, we're big believers in the concept of like the body being strong. It doesn't have to be overly strong. So body like per size is kind of a big component. Like what's your strength per body weight or power per body weight? So that gives you a much more kind of total thing. We did this back in college, and I was a grad assistant in the weight room at UOP. We talked about pound for pound. What's the pound for pound the best athlete versus like who's the most powerful? That guy might be a really huge dude. He's maybe really powerful, but he can't move. Right? Arnold Schwarzenegger, a super strong guy, but he's not exactly your best athlete. You don't really want him on the football field maybe because he's not very agile. So pound for pound, who's your best athlete? And that's kind of always a good number to go back to as to what's solid. So you found a lot of great stuff looking at some different variables here, like grip being maybe an indication of health of the body.
Yeah. I work with a lot of athletes that injure their hands. So it happens in firefighting, oddly enough. So I do this with firefighters quite a bit, but I also interact with the MMA community. Uriah Faber's team Alpha MMA. We got some quality fighters. At least like 20 of them are in the UFC, and almost every other weekend we got one fighting. And the life of a martial artist is a life of hand trauma. If you haven't figured that out, in the movies you see people get hit like 5 times. In an MMA fight, you see people get hit maybe like twice, and they're kind of done. And one of the hard parts about hitting someone in a hard part of their body, like their skull or their jaw or their face, is oftentimes you break your hand. And so it's an interesting viewpoint because with all these fighters, they'll heal up with their broken hand pretty quick. But to get that strength back, they have to try really hard, and it won't tell them. That's the other part of it. Weakness doesn't really tell you. Your body just cheats it. If you rob the body of strength, you've given it kind of an impossible problem to figure out, but it'll cheat, it'll compensate, it'll do everything in its power to not expose your weakness. But I'll tell all these athletes that they have to do a single arm hang off of a bar for 10 seconds. Now what that equates to is if you test them on a dynamometer or a grip handheld dynamometer, they need to be about 60-70% of their body weight to be able to do a max squeeze. But I look at the monkey hold. So if you don't have a dynamometer, then challenge all of every athlete, because you can't ask the soccer athlete to have a strong body, but don't worry, we don't care about your grip because these guys just flopping in the wind. That doesn't work. Athletes are strong or they're weak. We don't have to like piecemeal them together where their strength needs to lie. Strong body is a strong body. And so I ask any of my athletes, hey, you should be able to hang for sure. Then can you hang with one hand? And then can you do it for 10 seconds? But if you have a dynamometer, it should be north of 60% of their body weight. I tell all the adults, if you're ready to die, then you can be underneath 50%, 5-0. If you want to live and thrive and excel in life, north of 50% for sure. And that means you have to pick up stuff and carry it. Oddly enough, that might just do the trick. those farmer carries. We're going to turn everyone into farmer men and women out there.
Yeah, so the farmer carries, 2Ks carry are great tools to use. We like using the bottom ups kettlebell quite a bit as well. The bottom up one is great to developing grip strength. You can work with less load, but they have to have more control at that time. And the hold times that you might utilize as an exercise like this was shockingly
similar.
Shockingly between 60 and 90 seconds. But if you can build those things in, that's a great way to develop grip. And then the overhead, the monkey hang is it's fantastic.
Yeah, the buddy is kind of smart. If you just took an active person, like I like referencing my wife for a lot of things because she doesn't really lift a lot of weights. She's like a musician mom, so she does her light fitness activity, but it's not like we have kettlebells for her at home. I got my kettlebell, but nothing's for her. Sorry, but she can hang quite easily. She can kind of hang. She'll regularly hang and do kind of knee tucks, and she carries furniture, and we kind of move it around the house. And if I test her grip, it's definitely 55-60% of her body weight. Now, if she gained 30 pounds of fat, she would be underneath my threshold. I would say, oh, you're trying to die soon.
Yes.
As judged by that simple measure. Go and look it up. It's the grip test for longevity. It's really clear as day. You want to be a healthy adult, you got to be north of 50%. So you have two options: weigh less or get stronger.
Yeah. That's all that's all there is to it. But I think that's such a great example of the simplicity of it. Is for the body to be in order to grip strong, a lot of good things have to happen too. Like there's a lot of coordination to that. There's a lot of elements to that. We see lots of research associated with grip strength and rotator cuff involvement and strength activity. But at the end of the day, the question becomes: Can you move your own body? Do you have control of your own body in space? To me, that's what it ultimately comes down to when we're programming for somebody or trying to help them out. It's can you own your own body first? Can you hang? Can you do a push-up? Can you do a squat to the ground? Can you do maybe a pistol squat to the ground? Would be beyond the norm, but a great goal. But can you move your own body first? And if the answer to that question is yes, then we can add external loads and we can start talking about now can you generate force beyond that metric. But I think all too often we skip this segment and we just go right to let's add external load. Well, you can't even squat with no load. So why do we need to add external? Or you can't even do a push-up. Why do we have to do a bench press? Let's get solid with moving your own body. Because at the end of the day, that's what athletics, that's what sports, that's what life's all about.
Yeah, I think we get held captive here that people enter into a gym with over $100,000 worth of equipment. And the PT or the trainer or the coach feels a need to use the equipment. And if the person doesn't need the equipment and what they need is to operate their own body well, you should be doing that first and foremost. Don't forego all the crap. If they need to work on their body control, work on their body control. I'm amazed at working in gyms how many times I strip people. I say, oh, you're off limits for all of these fun toys. Let's work on these patterns. And then they say, well, I can do these patterns at home. Oh yeah, you were sold the wrong idea. You were said that you have to come to a gym because of all the equipment in the gym. That's a fallacy. That's a big old myth. What you needed is accountability and social connection and good coaching.
Right, and regardless of what resistance tool you want to utilize, that works. And in fact, at the gym, it might be effective to use the weights as an assistive tool in many cases, right, where you're doing less than body weight just to kind of build up enough strength so you can get to doing body weight in most cases. But we see it all too often. So.
I think that's where bodybuilding of the 80s and 90s had a great thing for it. And I think it's common for generations to look prior and they want to poo-poo the prior generation and say, well, we're smarter, so we should be doing it better. We should be doing it different. We've used that phrase before. Let's do it different. We're trying to innovate. But the fact is that what was done prior has a lot of merit because it's helped bring out amazing, competitors in the Olympics and in pro sports and in military and tactical. What was done 30 years ago has shaped the current elite right now. So if we look back, I look back and I become a little bit more traditionalist in this approach. And I actually tell people it's time to bodybuild. You need some good old-fashioned bodybuilding right now. You need these basic exercises that are isolation in nature, and let's work on this area in a very slow pattern. I'm amazed how, backwards I get sometimes.
It works. I mean, it works for doing a lot of things we've talked about. It works for changing the hormone levels. It works for stimulating localized muscle health, muscle size, strength, there are many components. So it's quite safe overall if you're doing it in certain ways. Obviously, there's things that are less safe, but overall, it's not a bad option. But I will say this, that I think is something I learned in my process, my development, as I started getting more and more elite athletes on my schedule, if you will. It was really interesting to see, and talk to them. I had this one guy stood out to me, blew out his ACL, PCL, MCL, and he had to have 2-part surgery, whole thing. I got him about 8 months post-op, and he's like, yeah, tell him they can't get my legs strong enough, and I got to go back to the NFL, so can you help me? So I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so I said, well, let's get you back. You're 8 months out. You certainly can do the basics. Let's start squatting. I said, have you squatted much? He goes, well, just body weight and stuff. I said, well, have you done it in a rack or anything since the surgery? And he goes, no. I said, okay, well, let's get started with that because I need to add external load to you. I mean, the kid weighs like 240 pounds and he's got thighs that are as big as 2 of my thighs, and he's number 3 on the NFL on his roster. Like, this dude can lift, right? It wasn't a question. I didn't think it was a question. As a matter of fact, it was a question. So we get over to the rack and I'm like, all right, so we're going to get into just squat. Let's just do like 185 and give it a go. And he's like, well, I'd never done this before. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I've never squatted with a bar before. I'm like, hold on a second. I said, you're in the NFL, right? Yeah. He said, oh, yeah. 2 years. And you went to college, went to D1 college. Yep. He goes, oh, but whenever they told us to do this, I was out of the weight room, and I snuck out of the weight room. I got out of there.
Snuck out.
I'm like, why are your thighs twice the size of mine? And how did you make it to the league if you never squatted? Because to me, that was a crazy concept.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't the weight room what gets you there? Oh no. Right. I've come to learn quite clearly the weight room is not at all what gets you to the elite performance. And that notion been repeated to me over and over by NFL players, NBA players. I mean, you could see it in the NBA. You name the sport, it's not the weight room that gets them there. Now, the weight room might add components to their success and build strength, and there are certainly guys who use it effectively. But you see it. You see it as certain guys in their career. Brady's a big guy, speaks a lot about this, but Mahomes has got a lot of stuff out there about this, where these guys aren't lifting heavy, powerful, big weight room type weights. They're going back to doing more functional type movements, things like we're talking about. Can they control the body, control their own body in such a way that they can be successful athletes? Mm-hmm. And you see that type of training kind of taking stronghold. Now, of course, if you're an offensive lineman and you get paid to move somebody else's body as well as your own, then it's required that you go lift in the weight room, right? So it's very specific, but keep that in mind that the weight room is not a precursor to elite performance. It can be a tool, but it doesn't have to be. I even asked them, I said, how do you guys get your legs like so strong and so developed? And they're like, when I put the cleats on and we go on the field and I run routes, like we run hard. And they do. And they're running hard routes. And when they make a 90-degree turn in the ground, they put that foot in the ground and their hips are below their knees when they hit like a stopping point and change direction. They are in deep, deep positions at full speed, requiring that tissue to really adapt and pull. And that's what's kind of giving them this growth, this development that's pretty epic,
Working with Uriah Faber for the last 15 years, he was always allergic to the weight room. And he talked about it. And he would fully say to a lot of the athletes that I work with that I don't think that helps me unless I'm injured. Now, whenever he was injured, which happened every fight. So you do a fight, you get injured. So, although he never loved it for performance, and I have to agree with him. I'm not so sure its role is in performance, oddly enough, but it definitely helped him regenerate in a hurry. He would get hurt, go through a lifting cycle. Once he felt his norm, then he got back and he got strength, speed, and power doing the work that he's designed to do. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Yeah. Maybe our performance development is actually really just phenomenal rehabilitation, regeneration in the appropriate cycle. Maybe Absolutely. For some. Maybe for some. Yeah.
I think it's going back. That's a perfect way to look at it. Is maybe it's a tool to use in the process. I'm not saying don't go out there and be like, I don't have to go to the gym today. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that if you can go hard enough, that you can go max effort 100% against other humans at their max effort potential, and you can compete, you're probably going to build enough strength and stability to control your own body without having additional load. But for most of us that can't do that because we've gotten too weak and we've gotten too atrophied and we're not in that position, then using the weight room and using some of this equipment can be a great way to stimulate these responses we're talking about to maximize healing and put you in a good position.
Well, we started this conversation with a bit of the difference in how tissue heals. And I think it's important for the listener to understand that, when you talked about, 1 month for muscles, 2 months for bone, 3 months for soft tissue, you're not just referencing injury, you're referencing stress. If the stress reacts to a certain point where tissue breaks, obviously that's trauma. But what if it's just good old fashioned, something hard, a hard stressful exercise or a hard stressful practice? So there's a huge variance in how people adapt. Some people, they just need a 45-minute stimulus of an aggressive sport and their body adapts. Other people, we don't have that genetic gift. We have to work a lot harder to get the same type of adaptation. I think this comes down to the value of a coach. You look at the person in front of you and you put together a custom program that helps them achieve their goals. That's harder than it sounds because you really have to pay attention to the person, to their history, to where they're going, and what's the trajectory. Are you on a program that's doing its job, or did they need more stress? They just might be those people that just need more stress for longer to get where they want to go. And some people, they just freakishly adapt, the super compensator.
Yep. That's a great concept. And there's some great stuff out there about this idea of adaptation and the super compensator, and this idea of super compensation it's actually a formula. It's actually a process. If you're not familiar with it, it's a periodization practice. But essentially what you have to realize is that every person is going to have their own adaptation cycle. Now, these numbers we're giving you are very general, but as a coach, you have to interpret how fast can this person adapt. And there's really, really fast adapters where they'll be challenged and be stressed, and then they'll hit kind of a peak. And usually with the body, it's like a 6 or 8 week is kind of like a general theme. That's how we have these cycles that we utilize, mostly because of the numbers we just talked about. Muscles 4 weeks, bone 6 to 8, and then cartilage and such is closer to 3 months. So somewhere in the middle there is kind of your 6 to 8 week window, and that's kind of how long the body can tolerate a certain load consistently before you have to unload it. And then when you unload it, it actually heals and adapts and then can do significantly more than it was able to do before and achieves a new high or new personal best. This is why you see like world records happen at the Olympics or like personal bests happen at the Olympics. It's because people were loaded appropriately prior to the event, unloaded directly before, and then they achieve a new success level they've never attained before. And when it's done properly, it's a beautiful thing. It's unbelievable to watch and be a part of. It takes an insane amount of trust to unload an athlete right before an event, but let them have success. But that concept is good. The thing I want to get to here is some people adapt really quickly, but they only need like a couple days off and they get recovered, and then boom, they made the compensation, they're ready to go again. Some people go up and they actually plateau, and they have to stay at that plateau for a period of time, maybe a week or so, and then their body starts to adapt to catch up, their sleep cycle gets better, and then boom, they take off. And others go up and they have a significant drop in performance. They actually get worse for a period of time, usually again about a week or so, and then they start to kind of come back, rebound, and hit that super compensation curve. So you'll see different types of curves with different people, and as a coach, you have to understand that that's part of the game. A bit of it, I think, is genetics. A bit of it might be time of the year, time of the month, might be other factors, stress in their life. It's all factors that make this curve change and adapt. And I think that's certainly the biggest art of programming, especially when you're working one-on-one.
You saw this a lot when you were at the Olympics with a few of your athletes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is what we did with, we took Stephanie to the gold medal. This is pretty much what we did is we kind of introduced her to this concept. She hadn't been using it prior. She was 35th in the world. We went from a tubular stress fracture injury that we rehabbed, worked on what we just talked about, worked on balance, control, body awareness, positioning. And then that got her in positions she'd never been able to get into before. And then throughout the weight room, we programmed the weight room in such a way that she would have, these peak cycles and then come off of it. And we learned her adaptation curve, and then we maximized her adaptation curve to our advantage, where we would then load her extensively to a point where 2-3 weeks before an event, she'd be absolutely exhausted from the weight room and from training and be totally fatigued and, be hardly difficult to walk, so to speak. She was just getting really, really tired. And then we'd unload her for a period of like 7 to 10 days. And that would allow her body to recover and create the super compensation curve. And then she'd come back and achieve a PR or a personal best, So we won the gold in 2008 with that strategy. And then we're competitive for the next 8 years with the same type of thing. You see it all the time.
It's kind of interesting to hear you say that, because it's almost like, we're talking about the most elite in the world, gold medal at the Olympics. Nothing else momentous can beat that. And really it's just really just mastering stress adaptation. And that means also mastering when to rest, when to push hard. And I tell this to a lot of my patients, whether you're an elite pro, just had a two just win this last weekend on ESPN for the UFC fight. And for them, it's an 8-week cycle of 8 weeks of a really hard camp. And the last 10 days, it's a sharp decline. And if they don't do that decline, they're super at risk of injury, but then they're going to show up, they're going to have poor performance because they're not going to be able to last a 25-minute fight. And really it's mastering the art of recovery. But we see this on the regular day patient schedule. And if we don't program a deload week, if we don't program some time where we have a sharp decline in volume or intensity, I think the person tells us this. I'm a little sick. I'm a little under the weather. I'm in more pain. Why am I in more pain? It possibly could just be your body needs a little catch up to the load that we've been applying for the past 3, 4, 5 weeks. And so if you're not a mastery of this stress adaptation response because you're working with elite pros that demand it for a living, if you don't master it, you tend to just have a lot of your patients just start barking a lot in some capacity.
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, being able to understand that cycle of how you can challenge someone's body, get it to challenge it to adapt. And if they're consistent with the application, that comes in big. Because if they can consistently apply the stress for a period of time, could be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe you can extend it to 10 weeks, depending on their training load and training age and what you're doing with them. And then you give them that window to recover. It's spectacular, but you're right. They will demand it. This is where you start to see the overtraining stuff come in, where they'll start to demand it, where they won't sleep as well. They'll be tired. They'll be exhausted. And like I said, I knew that with her, so we knew how much we could push. But it took us a while to learn that. It took us almost a year of kind of working together, kind of to master it to that level of a T. And that's not really indicated with every patient. But I've got a patient right now. We had her today, as a matter of fact, was great. She's a runner. She's a collegiate runner. She's qualified to run in the national championships in a week and a half. And she, in her words, out of the blue, she's competing in the indoor national championships. She's been competing for about 6 to 8 weeks. And they did a sprint workout last week after she'd already qualified for the national championship, did a sprint workout, and then didn't have anything happen during the event, but then after it, she woke up the next day and her hamstring super sore, pain in the leg, shut down her workouts for 2 days, and then has now been able to go back and run a bit, but is still pretty beat up in the fact that, am I going to be able to run in 10 days of the national championship? So when I look at that, I'm like, we don't really have a tissue, tearing tissue damage problem. We have a nervous system problem where the nervous system has become stressed, it's become fatigued, and the tissue overall was overstressed, and now we have this, it's fighting back, saying, no, we're not doing it anymore. So now it takes tremendous bravery, which is the conversation we had, is all right, how long can you shut down your heart and lungs? Can you take 10, I don't want you to take 10 days off, but are you comfortable in your brain that you can take off 3 to 4 days right now, shut this thing down? Not to say you can't work out, but you're not going to challenge this part of your body, and you gotta just do more of a recovery workout, get some movement, do some basics, and then maximize our inflammation management, eat well. Let's sleep well. Let's get your body recovering for 2-3 days, and then let's see by Thursday, Friday, I bet you bounce back and we're in a pretty good spot. We get 2 or 3 good runs in prior to your travel, and then when you travel there, you get 1 run before your event. Now, I don't work with this young lady on her programming, but just knowing what I know, I just took it over because nobody else is talking to her about this. And if it's not done, there's no chance she runs in the national championship in 10 days, and it's a senior season and the whole thing. And it's just not the best management, but it's all right. We're fine. We just identified it. So okay, we're going to take it over and this is how you're going to manage it now, which is what we do. It's fine. That's our job. But it's if I don't understand that cycle, then I can't do that.
And we're the only ones to do this. No coach could do this because they've got 30, 40, 50 other athletes to manage. There's just no way. Yeah. This is exactly our role. And if we don't dive all in and understand stress adaptation, then this kid's lost.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually kind of excited because I think she'll do really well. This happened to us several years ago. It was the big Western states, the biggest 100-miler. It was big here in the Northern California area. It was a really cool event. I mean, if you're into running 100 miles, I have no interest whatsoever, but it's really quite, it's spectacular what they do. They run from Auburn down the Sierra Nevada mountains to Sacramento. It's incredible. But we had this lady who came in, and she was absolutely like just beside herself, because this is like hard to qualify. There's only like 100 people in the race. It's hard to qualify. It's a big honor. She's done well before in the event. But she ended up with, again, same thing, kind of a hamstring or a quad thing, and it was like 4 weeks out. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do this because I'm not trained." And it's like, hold on a second. Let's talk about what it means to be trained. How long have you been running for? Like 15 years? Like, you're going to be all right. You've got a base, okay? Your body knows how to run. You've been doing it for the last 5 months consecutively. You're going to be okay there. I promise you. She's like, "There's no way." I'm like, calm down. This is going to be all right. So it's a longer conversation than this, but the concept was, get her to understand that, hey, some time off here is actually going to be okay. So we ended up taking like a 2-week kind of time off of running essentially, but there was other work done during that time. Obviously, she's doing some rehab stuff, and we did some other cardiovascular things to keep her moving and keep her blood flow, and don't go to bed rest, but stay active, be somewhat active. And it killed her mentally. But then we took the training wheels off, with like a week out of the race, and said, "Okay, let's go get a good run in. Let's go get 2 or 3 good runs in before you go." And then she went and did the race, and I think she finished like 2nd or 4th in her age group or something, and PR'd. And it's like, yeah, like I'm not surprised you PR'd, because we typically like just try to do so much volume that we drive ourselves into the ground, where it's like, it's not the way the body works. The body works with hard push, adapt, and you have to let it adapt. You have to give it a window to do so, and then when it does, it's going to be stronger than it's ever been.
So I see 2 challenges in all that, knowing that happens all the time with people. That's what they need.
Yeah.
Is to have the practitioner. I see 2 challenges. One, how do you gain the knowledge and rapid experience to be able to have confidence in yourself to tell that to someone? And then 2, how do you establish that trust so that they fully buy in? Because they're going to challenge you. They're going to say it with their fear, or they're going to say it with their questions. They're going to ask why, or they might just say, "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to go hurt myself tomorrow." I see those pretty 2 difficult challenges.
Yeah. Well, it helps to have a gold medal hanging behind you on the wall, that's for sure. But I mean, you have to go back to the science, right? I mean, there's actually quite a good bit of good science around it. And as you start explaining, people are saying, "Oh yeah, like I've seen that before. Like I understand what you're saying." They don't know why greatness was achieved, but they notice when they saw it. If you reference it, they're like, "Oh, I see why." Examples would be like, in the Olympics, people hitting their PRs and stuff, because why would that happen in the Olympics? If you were that fast, just run that fast all the time. Well, it's not how the body works. You can't run that fast all the time. You can only run that fast on certain moments at certain times. And then as you train for it, it becomes more natural, but that's not like you can just do it for like 12 weeks straight. It doesn't work like that. And it's the same thing we see it in life. Like, do you ask any human, like, "Hey, can you be at your best for 12 consecutive weeks, tip of the spear, let's go all in?" And it's just not sustainable. It's not, anything beyond 12 weeks is completely unsustainable. You think in business, they have like things we call sprints. You do a 1 or 2 week sprint because you can focus and work hard for a period of time. And then after that, it just starts to deteriorate, frankly. Then different forms of burnout occur. So I think it's tough, but you do have to talk science. And then you have to acknowledge all of the problems they're facing, listen to them. And as you acknowledge all the problems you're facing and you tie all of their problems, not intentionally, but through science, to the situation, all of a sudden, they're like, "This makes a lot of sense." Yeah, it does. That's the number one thing that I get from the person when I'm doing my treatment sessions with them. Like, "Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's like,
that makes sense.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? So then let's use that sense to our advantage. And then usually you can gain a tremendous amount of buy-in and have success with it. Then they never leave. It's the other side of that coin.
I am really amazed in my own, with my own patients, how often I reference really the same science, the same principles over and over and over again. I think that's what's nice when you try to not follow what's trendy, but try to look deep to science principles that have stood the test of time, like what we talked about with mitochondrial fissuring and density and growth and the slow tension changes that can improve collagen synthesis. When you go to the most root of the principle, then you'll find your way. Whereas if you're always going to the new trendy exercise that you see, you're constantly lost because it's not rooted in a foundational principle that you can flex at a moment. If all you've got is a lot of cute exercises, you really have no idea what you're doing. And someone's going to need you at a time like this when tissue adaptation is the mastery that is needed in that moment, and then effective communication of that mastery so you get maximum buy-in. You got to be fierce in your approach of reading the right books and reading the right research and saying, why am I doing this? And if you can answer the why with a credible story where people say, that makes sense, then I think you're onto something. If you can't make sense of your own thinking, then it's probably unclear.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we can reference some of the great books and stuff that are out there to discuss the topic. There was one more item. Did we have? Was that? And we talked about two. Was there a third one that was relevant?
It was the mitochondria. It was the get up and the grip,
strength,
and then the exercise induced hypoalgesia.
That loading's important.
Yeah, that load. Yeah.
Do you have to load tissue to cause adaptation? Those are the big principles of today. But book-wise, I mean, I think we reference Peak quite a bit by Dobbs, right? It's
Mark Bubbs. Let me get that.
Yeah, let's confirm. But great, and he has a book that's for over 40, which is interesting as well. And then his main book, Peak, he was a team doc for the Toronto Raptors. But really, that's the best I have seen as far as the complete text of like how the body like performs better. And what are the key ingredients? He talks about sleep as one of the first few chapters, talks about gut health and digestion, which goes back to nutrition. And then he gets into this load and load management, which is massive in the NBA.
Yeah, Mark Bubbs, 2019. It's all very up-to-date bibliography. He did a really phenomenal job at bringing it all to the surface.
It's very good. It's a very it's an easy read, but yet there's tremendous detail on science and research, and then he summarizes at the end of each chapter. So I just think he really did a really nice job. But that's probably the best I've read that gets the job done there. I mean, Mark Verstegen's a friend of mine and been my mentor forever. I mean, his book on Every Day is Game Day kind of speaks to the same concept in many ways. We talked about the pillars last time when we look at nutrition, mindset, movement, and recovery as kind of these four big pillars. Mark talks about that extensively in that book and how you have to have those pillars lined up to maximize performance. Probably a little less about adaptation than we talked about. I'll throw something in the chat after we post this regarding adaptation. There's a Russian coach that coaches many Olympians in Canada, as a matter of fact, who's written most of the stuff on this. And I heard him speak, which is in Russian, which was really enlightening. But it was, translator, thank goodness. But it was still interesting. And like the questions at the conference, a lot of people were asking him questions at the conference, and he always answered the question, pretty much the same way. Like, you just have to load. But interestingly enough, one thing he spoke of that I thought was great, that really stood out, is that in certain sports, like in track and field, that was what we were there for, and there were many throwers there. So we're talking about, the throwing sports like shot, discus, et cetera. And they're typically associated with heavy weights, lots of power. Olympic lifts, snatch are very highly correlated to throwing something further, which they are. But his research was quite clear, besides these adaptation curves, that he also found that there was a peak where if you could get your snatch up to a certain level of kilograms, certain number of kilograms per body weight, that snatching more weight beyond that had no improvement in performance. Which speaks back to this idea of like, once you get strong enough that you can control and move your own body effectively, then lifting more weight only increases risk rather than increasing performance. And I think that's very consistent with what I've seen in sports, and that you have to be smart about your training. Just adding more weight is not what it's all about. Think about it from other perspectives.
I think it's powerful. I think I've learned a lot from one of my mentors is Pavel Tsatsouline. He's the chairman of Strong First, and he's a huge fan of science. Any book that he writes has a very detailed bibliography. So two of my favorites would be Simple and Sinister, where he speaks a lot of core stability and grip strength. But the other one is the quick and the dead. He dives deep into mitochondrial fissuring quantity and quality, as well as challenging the phosphocreatine system, and how can we dance back and forth between improving the aerobic health to replenish the substrates it needed for another phosphocreatine hit. And it's important to see the overlay between the anaerobic and the aerobic systems of how it's not a light switch. They're constantly interacting with one another. And his books really helped me appreciate of how simple exercises done with different intervals can really give a really quite a distinct adaptation, depending, again, if you're more training more for tactical, military, or martial art, or you're doing more of a 7-second burst with a 45-second recovery, which is the entire American football experience, versus a soccer athlete where you're constantly in jog mode with sprints intermittent everywhere that resembles the old-fashioned beep test. So we're really looking at the sport demands, what's the power, the speed, the conditioning, and what's the bucket to fill, and then how are we going to influence it, and more importantly, how are we going to change the load to help with the stress adaptation response, which is what we as a PT dive right into. If we want to be good at sports medicine, we have to understand the sport. We have to understand the demand of the body. How is the person currently training to excel in that area? And then how is the body able to adapt to the stress that they're doing?
Yeah, I think Pavel's stuff is really good. When in learning from you through him, it always seems to me that he has a little bit of a different take on like your traditional periodization models. Like it's not so much a linear periodization model, but there's different types of periodization, and I think it's super interesting because we focus so much in training on typically linear periodization, which is a very good model for developing power and explosiveness and hypertrophy. And of course, there's many, many models now that are out there, the West Side models and different things to kind of do those things as well. But that's great for a combat sport like football, where you're moving other bodies, or maybe wrestling, or even MMA to some degree. But one thing that I think we miss with that model that Pavel speaks to is owning your own body first, which is if you can move your own body and own it and control it first, own your cardiovascular system, own your tissue health, and make it move the way you want it to move. That's going to be so effective in most of the other sports. Whether it be tennis or soccer or golf or basketball, where there's not nearly as much contact. The sport's not defined by contact, at least. All right, if you guys have some comments, some feedback, throw that in the chat. In the link below, we'll be happy to interact and look forward to those questions as well. We can answer those on a future episode. Other than that, thanks for watching KIMEcast. We'll see you on the next one.